Right, maybe ready. Mr. Fanning, how did you come to go to Mount Sinai School?
Oh, that's an interesting question. My father was one of the big men, I would say, in the brothers in the early days of the century. He was very, very close to the brothers. Matter of fact, just again by way of digression, I'll invariably digress as I go along. My house in Thomas Street was one of the few houses visited by the brothers in those days. I'm talking about the early 20s. Brothers in those days lived a very secluded life. They weren't encouraged to mix outside the monastery. It was rather a strict regime, and in my view, a very, very false regime. It wasn't good for the men themselves and didn't enable them to mix properly and identify fully with the people around them. And my father was, as I say, a great friend of them. In the days when Mount Sinai and brother schools generally throughout the country existed on the pennies of the people and the small subscriptions from poor people, that was their main source of income. They were, even when the Free State was established, for a number of years after that, they refused to go in under the scheme because of what they felt would be religious difficulties, and that because, as you probably know, it's a matter of history now, the brothers existed for generations without participating in the national school system as operated by the British. One of the reasons being that on the visit of inspectors, the inspectorate in Ireland, which would be part of the Imperial Inspectorate from London, they required of, it was, if you like, a carryover from penal times and penal days. It was required that on the visit of an inspector, all statues visible in the school would be removed or covered. The brothers never accepted that. They were typically Irish and very much creatures of their time, and they never conformed to the British regime in this country at all. And that continued into the 20s until reassurances were given under various headings, and the brothers then entered the thing, and then the brothers were paid by the state. And when I went to school first, about 1923, we took in a penny each week, and that was the sustenance for the education, paying for the education and all of that. But that's how my father and all my uncles and that also went to Mount Sinai, going back into the latter part of the 19th century. So that was the reason for my going to Mount Sinai, apart from the fact that it was my father identified very much with the CB, Christian Brothers ethos, and I moved to Mount Sinai as naturally as breathing.
Okay, and can you remember, how did you go to school in those days? I mean,
we lived in Thomas Street in those days, which you went up Ballybrick and up Green Street and straight into Mount Sinai. Walked every day, and as I say, I went in about 1923. I was born in 1918, went into Mount Sinai in 23 and remained there until 36 when I did my leaving cert. It's a very interesting thing with the results of the leaving out today, and 58,000 people. In my class in Mount Sinai in 36, we had 15 people doing leaving. That will give you an idea of what O'Malley's introduction of so-called, in inverted commas, free education, but it was. Although again, if you forbear to listen to me, free education was always with the Christian Brothers. I think, I'm not sure, and we're jumping now from 1923 to going into secondary school, I think it was a couple of pounds a year. A couple of pounds, it seems very mild, but a lot of money for people struggling to live in the hungry 30s. And we had, they came into Mount Sinai, and if a boy or his father or his mother didn't have the wherewithal to pay that couple of pounds a year, there was no pressure, never asked. No boy was ever turned away from a Christian Brothers school because he was unable to pay the pittance, but the necessary pittance for the education.
Okay. What was school like in those days? I mean, being educated by the brothers, was there any customs, or would you remember any traditions that were done?
No, well, of course, the great tradition in the brothers was, first of all, religion and nationality, or even nationalism, because I do think any concept of nationalism I acquired it in Mount Sinai. The depth of religion was for, in other words, the old phrase God and Fatherland. That was the Christian Brothers ethos all down the years, and they carried that through to. But the brothers, any memories of the brothers in the 20s and 30s, I have only a concept of a very, very happy sojourn. Now, you hear a lot of things now about the brothers and the severity of the brothers. But remember now, I'm talking about a generation where what happened in school was happening, and not in my home, but happening in homes generally. There was that strict discipline, and physical punishment was everywhere and rampant. It was overdone, no doubt about it. But I have nothing, and I mean this as true as I'm going to make out soon enough, I suppose. But I never experienced it in Mount Sion, and you will hear talk of the severity. It was a severe regime, but I think it was. I found it in my experience anyway. But I became friendly with the brothers from the very beginning, and I had this great love of the brothers and of the Christian brothers and of Edmund Rice. Even in those days, now he's blessed Edmund now, but even in those days, I had through my family a reverence for him and what he stood for at a time when the brothers themselves tended to chuck him into the background and to not. You see, he had been a married man. He was the father of a child, and that didn't fit in with the Catholic concept of those days. And sure, it's true of many founders of religious congregations over the centuries that people were married and went into religion and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, the question I want to get around to then is, like, why is Mount Sion such an important place for a lot of people? A lot of people often, like yourself, people like Jack O'Neill, say it probably is the most famous address in the world. I mean, why does it have such a relevance?
Well, now I'll give you an example. Over the last 25, it's up to about 10 years ago, and for a period of 25 years, groups known as tertians, groups of brothers from all over the world, America, all parts, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji even, in latter times, they did a tertianship of study and reflection and all that, and they did it in Rome and the Holy Land. And at the end of each period of tertianship, their last call was to Ireland. They finished up in Ireland and Mount Sion, and there was, as a matter of fact, I used to address them each time, twice a year, 2 6-monthly sessions. And when you'd see their reverence for, their awe virtually on being present where Rice worked and died, and to really amaze you. And they had this love of the man and his name and the place, and to come to the place where it all began. Yes, Jack is probably true. I get letters still and calls from brothers who had been at the tertianships, and the high point of their time was their visit to Mount Sion. They're going through the city of Waterford on what is known as the Rice Trail. The places where he walked, they walked. The houses in which he lived, they stood outside the house in New Street where he started in his stable, and then onto Mount Sion where it all began. And remember, it became one of the major teaching congregations in the history of the church. And from Mount Sion they went first into England, then into Gibraltar, then further afield down to Australia at a time when Australia was a relatively young, still a young nation, a young nation. And the impact of the brothers in Australia is quite extraordinary. And their past pupils unions in Australia now are among the major institutions in the various states in Australia, the provinces in Australia. And Mount Sion is a holy place, and the place wherein reposes the remains of Edmund Rice. And it's an extraordinary story that in the Waterford of its time, and they'll tell you that there were schools in Waterford at the time of Rice. There were pay schools, there were Catholic schools, and they catered for those who could pay. But for those who couldn't pay, there was nothing, literally nothing. And I believe that the Christian Brothers, which had its beginnings in Mount Sion, enabled the Irish people in large parts of the country to get up off their knees. It gave them an education which would never have been theirs. It gave them an idea to develop the God-given intelligence which would never have expressed itself, would have remained hidden, and they would die as they lived, ignorant, removed from the little better, I hate to say it, than animals, without the opportunity to fulfill themselves morally, economically, socially. And I do believe that had race not lived, had the Christian Brothers not been founded, it would have taken Ireland generations to emerge as a free people. I do believe that sincerely. And again, I keep saying this, and I, with Mount Sion in mind, it was Conor Cruise O'Brien, of all people, who would be regarded as no friend that spoke about Mount Sion and about the emergence of the brothers and the emergence of the people through the efforts of the brothers. It enabled a craven people to recognise the strength that was in them and enabled them to articulate their thinking. Again, Mount Sion and the Christian Brothers at the foundation of the state, when everybody said, like, how would we manage? The civil service was the British civil service. The people would be still loyal to the British regime and all of that. And in the 20s, particularly from the brothers' schools, and not least from Mount Sion, came the leaders of a new civil service. And from that number emerged the civil servants that now rivals, not that I hold any brief for the British civil service or anything else, but now rivals in its integrity and everything, even that imperial civil service, which was, if you like, the creator of an empire. When I get going on Mount Sion, and I mean every word I say that without Mount Sion, I'm only a small person, and I would have been unable to express myself, unable to acquire the confidence as well as the ability to make whatever little mark I could in life, all to the brothers. My greatest friends were Christian Brothers, are Christian Brothers. They're a dying race now, but they are. And whenever, in moments of crisis, and this is literally true, and I hope this is pertinent to what you're all about, at moments of crisis in my life, and when I had decisions to make, I would always think, what would Brother O'Connor, what would Brother Malone think in this situation? And I would imagine what they would think and act accordingly. That was the extent of their effect on me and their influence over me. Now, there were brothers I didn't like, obviously. No,
can you tell us about someone you didn't like?
Life is not... No, men I didn't warm to as much. And of course, allied with all of that was the GAA.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you have such a great involvement with the GAA.
The GAA.
Yeah, can you tell us just, I mean, how did that all start, I mean, your involvement?
Well, it started, you see, with the Mount Sion Club was established in 1932 by Brother Malone, who had then left, but the idea was his, and the idea was brought to fruition by a Brother O'Connor, all in a matter of a couple of years. And in 1932 the club was founded. And I'll tell you an interesting thing about the Mount Sion Club, which is now regarded as one of the best clubs in Ireland, if I do say so myself. Brother Malone was a great friend of Charlie Weir, the great Charlie Weir, the great hurling fullback, who was the big man in the Erdenzone Club. Erdenzone had nothing, only the senior team, which was among the best individual club teams in the country. And Brother Malone approached Charlie and asked him, he said he had a group of boys who on leaving school would have nowhere to go, nowhere to continue their hurling, and he asked them if he and Erdenzone would take over these, and Charlie didn't see that he could do that. The result was the formation of Mount Sion Club. Had Charlie Weir agreed to take them over, very likely there would be no Mount Sion Club today. And how that would have changed the face of hurling in Waterford and the place of the GA in Waterford is only beyond contemplation. But I was hurling then. I won my first minor medal, my first GA medal, a minor county final in 1934, and played on then, went on to win seven county senior championship medals, in addition to a junior football championship medal in Mount Sion. Then in 1940, I became secretary of the Mount Sion Club. I was quite young. Secretary of the Mount Sion Club. I remember secretary for 15 years. Then I became, at that stage, I became president of the Munster Council, chairman of the Munster Council, and I vacated the secretaryship and became chairman, and remained as chairman of the club until I was elected president of the association in 1970. And between hurling and that, as I say, hurling and the GAA and Mount St. literally consumed me and governed everything I did in life. So that was the story of my involvement in Mount St. And again, and through the Christian Brothers, my understanding of the GAA, my concept of its place in Irish history, of again, if I say of the GAA, and I'm going back to Connacht Cruiser again, of all the great movements of 19th century Ireland, and that would include, in your own area, the Abbey Theatre, the formation of that, the Transport and General Workers' Union, a great social event, its foundation and its creation of a base from which working men were enabled to lift themselves up again. All of these things, the Land League, a very important period in the history, 19th century Ireland, and all of those, of them all, Connacht Cruiser O'Brien insisted, the GAA was the most durable and, in its effect, the most vital of all those organisations and movements, mass movements. It was a mass movement, he said, which changed the face of the country and gave purpose and meaning to young men at the time who, by the way, would have no other outlet in life but the playing of the games. Athletics was virtually beyond the ken of the ordinary man. The Amateur Athletic Association, which would have a British base, of course, wouldn't allow working men, couldn't participate in their meetings. And then it came the GAA and the establishment of the National Athletic and Cycling Association, which was a GAA creation, handed over to them in the 20s again after the Twalton Games. But all of this, I keep coming back to it. And if it had that effect on me, it had that effect on thousands, countless thousands of others. And the GAA, that was how important it was in the emergence not only of an Irish state, but of the creation, the restoration of a spirit of nationality and nationalism that virtually governed the course of Irish history from 1884 to the present day.
One of your biggest contributions to the GAA when you were president of the association was Rule 27. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, Rule 27, you see, now, first of all, I was there when it was removed, and my only I was in favour of the ban, and I'd recommend everybody to read a book, The Steadfast Rule, by Brown Dawn MacLua, now in England, and that would explain the history. It's not for now. That would explain the history and, more importantly, the purpose of this rule and the need for it. Now, times changed, and my only contribution, if I can claim that, was that when we went to Belfast to the Whitlaw Hall in Queen's University for the Congress in 1971, people thought we were going to tear ourselves asunder, that the association could not stand undivided on this issue. And I did conceive a plan, and I did prevent discussion on it, but got Congress to recognise that the counties had already spoken and that the interests of the association would be best served by simply proposing the abolition of the rule, and then I would proceed from there to the appointment of a committee which would discuss a new charter for the GAA, in which would be embodied all the commitments of the association as represented by the ban, like the primary purpose, the development and cultivation of Gaelic games, the recognition of the primacy of Irish industry in Irish people. The times were different to what they are now, like we're in Europe and all of that, but at that time, in an emerging situation, we needed to protect what we had, and we needed to inculcate in people a recognition of the importance for Irish people, of Irish goods and all of that. But that was the consequences of the ban then, was that, but I'd say this about the ban, I was in rugby playing colleges in Dublin and elsewhere, and we used to have blitzes there each year, Gaelic football, and I was assured by many a priest, look, we're all from a rural Ireland background, we're all from GA stock. If this ban were to go, then we would embrace hurling and football, and they would be, because they had been playing hurling and football in the early 20s and then dropped out because of the ban. But what happened was the very opposite. Our schools embraced, when I say our schools, I mean Gaelic games playing schools embraced soccer and to a lesser extent rugby, while the rugby playing colleges never embraced Gaelic games. They put it to me that it was the parents that didn't want them, but it wasn't in their ethos anymore. But anyway, that was the ban, and that was my contribution to it. It was, I suppose, one of the crucial issues of the day because of what it threatened rather than what it was, you know.
Yeah. And I suppose, just moving on, I mean, just to talk about hurling in general, it's such a fantastic sport nowadays, but do you ever see the day, I mean, in the future, in the days ahead, where it will be a professional sport?
Well, it's impossible to give a definitive answer to that, but I do believe that it's based on experience and based on actuality. First of all, there's very little call among players for payment for play. Nobody, that thought hasn't been articulated at all. Players are today treated very, very well. And through the GAA and through their fame as GAA players, that we're talking about the top men now, and that's the only people you'll be talking about paying anyway. Through the GAA, they have achieved a fame that would never have been theirs. They have achieved a recognition that they never would have achieved. And they have, through the GAA, established contacts which serve them well in their civilian and ordinary lives. Again, and this is, I think, the essence of the thing, I don't believe that our association could have a professional wing and maintain the association as it stands. Because the great bulk of money, I'll give you an example, rugby today, they're very, very sorry that they've gone down the professional route. I met a former president of the rugby union, the Cork man, won't say his name, and he said to me, I met him in the Berkeley Hotel in Dublin through a friend. And the first thing he said to me was, he said, I've said it to your colleague Con Murphy. And I said, I hope you don't do what we have done and go down the professional road. Club rugby has its back to the wall. The clubs generally, and they have a basic international outlet, which we don't have, are in straitened circumstances. And I think the essence of sport goes when you become professional. I don't believe that it's right to describe the professional rugby player, the professional soccer player, as a sportsman. No, I don't. That's not to denigrate them in any way. They're still the same men they were before they got paid. But they're working men doing a working job being paid for the job they do, and that's it. And their thinking necessarily must be, what's best for me? How do I add to my CV? And again, why I said the GA can't go down that road, because the GA, now it's a considerable force in Irish society, but all its money, apart from what goes on at necessary professional administration in Croke Park and in certain counties through full-time secretaries and the like, all of its money goes back into the development of the association. Were we a professional playing body, we couldn't even have contemplated the building of Croke Park. And Croke Park today is one of the finest stadia in, not only in Europe, but in the world, in the States and everything else. All done because all the money was used for the development of the games, for the preservation of clubs, the improvement of conditions and all of that. That would not be possible in a professional GAA. And again, you would create a core elite of players who would be totally removed from the club scene. It would be a desertion of all that the GAA stood for, that the association, which was founded in 1884 and had its ups and downs, but through all of that 120 or whatever it is years, has continued to develop and evolve Few organisations have done that over such a long period of time. It was because of the structure, based on the parish, based on the school, based on the community in a city or in a town throughout Ireland. Go through the country, even unthinkingly, but just think for a moment. Go through the country, pass through the rural areas where just you would imagine a few houses exist, and look, what do you see? You see the chapel, you see the school, and you see the GA field. That's the strength of the association, and that would be dissipated totally were we to go professional and create, as I say, this core elite of players to the exclusion of all the others. The under 16 player in Mount Sion, to me, and to Tony Brown and to Ken McGrath, is as important as Tony McGrath or Tony Brown, or Owen Kelly, or John Keane, the great John Keane, or Lockie Burton, or any of the great men who peopled our teams down the years. They are important, and they are recognised as being important. This core elite, now you can have the core elite within the GA, because the heroes are the men. We want heroes, we want giants, so the kids can wish to emulate and imitate and all of that. But I'm on my soapbox now, and this is the important thing. The structure of the GA, that's my final say, the structure of the GA will not permit us going down the professional route. And if we go down that route, then we change the structure, and I say we put at risk all that has been achieved for more than a century.
Okay. In, say, the future for Mount Sion, I mean in 100 years' time, say.
Oh no!
I mean, we're getting away from the
Yes, I know, but of course, again, you're going to have the gifts of prophecy.
Yeah.
But as long as the school, you see, isn't as strong as it used to be. Numbers of inner city schools have not. But if we continue to get Mount Sion now, if we continue to get the stream from the lads playing hurling in Mount Sion, then the future will be secured. Because I always claim clubs in the beginning create their own tradition through their own efforts. We were the inheritors of a tradition which was the CB tradition, and I think it gave us something special. Our 34, it's from 38 now, 1938, our 34 senior titles in 67 years is surely a telling demonstration of what tradition can do. Because we're no different to other clubs. Erin's Own did it for a while their team lasted. But that is testimony to the endurance and to the durability and to the constancy of the Mount Sion effort that we have done when other clubs have failed to win a championship. Drawing from the same streets, drawing from the same social background, the same work people, all of that. Something is there. And I believe that as long as the school continues and the supply from the school, even though it may weaken, and because of the clubs, and of course again I believe it's special, because of the club's devotion. See, you can never even dream of having a future unless you remember your past and live up to what the past dictates. And we have that past, and we've had our valley periods, but only in a couple of years. We've rarely been far removed from the top of the tree in Waterford. And so what will happen in 100 years, who knows? We'll be living in a different world, totally different world. Orwell's 1984 seemed stupid at the time. Now most of it has come to pass. Aldous Huxley in another great novel, I forget the name of it, the same thing, the world does come, I forget it.
Brave New World, was it?
The Brave New World, exactly. And nobody can imagine, although men of imagination can imagine it. Sure, look at H.G. Wells, the science fiction people and all of that, and what all has come to pass. But I don't know. But if the human spirit remains the same, and that is I suppose the only absolute in life apart from death itself, if that endures, then structures will endure. And I wouldn't go to my God happy if I thought the end of Mount Sion and all the Mount Sions would be in jeopardy.
Just to move away now, just very briefly, just to go on to just ask you about, I mean, going to Mount Sion. I mean, can you remember like going to school
Well, of course, it wouldn't have any effect, but it was always, it seemed to be ever present. And Daddy Curtis, a druggist there at the nearing the between Convent Hill and Mayor's Walk, and he was an institution, a lovable old man, a Quaker, I think he was, and because the Quakers generally were great understanders of the human spirit and all of that. But he was a doctor for, I would say, not only Barrack Street and its environs. He was a great man to create cures from plants and everything like that. And he was a lovable person. As I talk to you now, I can still see him coming out the door of his shop there, a small man, cherry-faced and rotund, but a lovable, almost a caricature. You'd find him in a book, you'd think he was a caricature, but a lovable person. I remember him, and of course the place around which life revolved in Mount St. I can't think of the name now. The thing is gone now. It's on the site of the chapel of the Blessed Sacrament, the Brother Rice Chapel. Wherever you go there, and the fellas just go into. I never smoked, by the way, but just go in and have their smoke and all of that. Things weren't as liberal then as they are now. Although smoking has gone completely, but that was it. Batterberries, which I had one of the Batterberries. He became an Asheri TD, I think. You wouldn't remember the Asheri, of course, and then Clonnapublic. He was in that, and they had a public house there, and one of them was also an All Ireland handballer. No, I don't. Lots of things flash through my mind now, but I can't identify them specifically, you know.
Okay. Can you remember any type of games that yourself and your friends would have played? I mean, when you were going to school. I know it sounds like a funny question.
Handball and hurling. And I remember there would be a group of us, and first up in the morning would have use of the handball. When I say handball, Katie Welch's, that was the name of the shop, and it was a big building, and her shop, her main wall would be would create the handball wall in the yard in Mount St. And I remember this. Myself and my mother used to go to 7 o'clock mass very young in the Dominican. We were in Thomas Street, only about 200 yards away, and we come home, get me breakfast, and we put Mount St. at 8 o'clock for 9 o'clock school, so that we get the handball in. So we had the handball and we had the hurling. And then we had, even in my time, we had Ogre Éireann there, which meant you played cards and this thing like that, a scéalge, you know.
Okay.
But that was all. And of course, there's another thing. There was always that great love of the language inculcated into you. You know, you don't remember again, but the language freedom movement, which came in like to abolish, to secure the abolition of compulsory Irish for the certificate examinations, the state examinations. And there was never that attitude of compulsion, as I remember it, in Mount St. But we did have, as did all up to relatively recently. Mount St. was the only boys' A school in the Diocese of Waterford and Lismore. You had a couple of convents as well. That meant that all subjects were taught through Irish, and people used to talk about that the Irish had an inhibiting effect on the teaching of other subjects. My Leaving Cert class, every one of them did honours Irish. You weren't even asked. You did honours Irish, and that was all about it. It was as natural as breathing, because the language. Now, again, it's a little thing, but when in my Leaving Cert class, now we had 1789 to the Congress of Vienna, that embraced the French Revolution up to the end of Napoleon and the Congress of Vienna. Now, our main textbook was Murhecht na Franke, the French Revolution. And that was our main thing. Now, we were getting books from the Students' Library in Dublin, which would be in English, but we were being taught in Irish. And it was presented, nor did I ever hear anybody say anything else now. See, what's natural is accepted. So only when there is this mental resistance to an idea, or an ideal even, that the opposition comes. But I suppose it had to go to. I remember when the Mount St. when it ceased to be an A school and became an ordinary school, in inverted commas, like teaching Irish through Irish and then teaching all other subjects through English. And Brother O'Dogan said at the time he hadn't any choice, and he was a fierce Gaelic-goer. He hadn't any choice because people were afraid of it, and they'd be going to Barrack or De La Salle. Of course, now in my time in Mount Sion, when I went into secondary, we were the only, I finished in 36 or 37, whatever it was, and we were the only Catholic secondary school in Ireland. De La Salle was still a teachers' training college, you know, and Barrack existed, but Barrack was, God bless the mark, elitist. And that was all. Then you had Newtown School and you had Bishop Fye. They were the Protestant school, or the Quaker school, and we were the only school. So the school was bigger, even though, as I told you, that'll give you an idea of the Ireland in which I grew up. People went from 6th standard into secondary, but the great majority dropped out and either went working at 14 years of age, went working, or went to the Czech. And as I say, now we ended up with only 15 people in the thing. And even out of that, we were then the big crowds up to 2nd and 3rd and 4th year, and we were able to field Harty Cup teams. Now we're not able to field Harty Cup teams anymore. We don't have the numbers.
What about the barracks, Mr. Fanning? I mean,
the barracks.
The barracks, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's a very imposing feature in Barrack Street.
Oh, it is. I should have dominated Barrack Street. Should I don't know now. Jack O'Neill would be more likely to tell you the origin of the name Barrack Street. Of course, obviously, it's because of the existence in the street of 2 military barracks. The infantry barracks, which is the one you're talking about, the main barracks, and then the artillery barracks at the top of what is now Carthages Avenue. And they were major, of course we were a strong garrison town, and they were major garrisons. And but you see, in the Irish, it's on Cursa Fada, the long course, and Cursa Garrett, short course. Now they must have preceded Barrack Street, because I mean you don't say Shrod Barrack or anything. If you were putting it on, its proper description would be on Cursa Fada. So that's rather strange, like, you know. So I would like to know that now that you put the thought, men must inquire into that. How well, obviously it came because of the presence of the barracks. But then, of course, the interesting thing about the barracks is, and no one's saying, that our secondary school in the 30s was switched. I forget what happened. Was it a fire or something? We were switched while the place was being done, and we spent some years in barracks in school. So the Mount St. School was actually based in the barracks, and we had to vacate that on the outbreak of war in 1939. The 3rd Battalion, which was a regular battalion, because it became very big afterwards with the people coming in from when the recruiting started during the war, building up the army into a huge force, maybe 250,000 men. And but they moved into the barracks in late 1939 or 1940, and they were based there and became quite a feature of social life in Waterford. The messes now, the officers' mess, the sergeants' mess, and the soldiers' mess, they all had their friends at all the levels, and that, and they were so strong now with people from Kilkenny, Waterford, Limerick, well, people living in the Curragh Command area. They entered the team in the Waterford Championship, and actually now figuring the records as having won the Waterford County Championship, I think in 1944. But we had to get back then into a kind of emergency quarters in Mount Sion when the army moved in. See, we only had it on kind of lease, if you like, from the Department of Defence. But that's an important feature of the story of the barracks in Barrack Street.
And can you remember when you just first went there? I mean, did you ever go just for a visit, or were you curious? Like, I mean,
in Barrack Street? Yeah. Well, of course, I served in the LDF, as the local events force now on force. What do you call it now? What's the main LDF? They don't call it LDF anymore.
Anyway,
what?
Is it the RCA or no?
No, it's now an integral part of the defence forces. You know, totally under military discipline and everything like that. But I served in that in the 46th Rifle Battalion during the war, and we did all our drilling and things up there. Like we did our shooting and out in places in the country. But I had an important, that battalion, it was a battalion of over 1,000 men, all water people, young and not so young, people who weren't in the army. And they would have a great regard for the barracks, a great love of the barracks. You were on parade there twice a week and did all your military training there, and all the bookwork and technical stuff was done there. And there was a great esprit de corps and everything like that in the place. So the barracks would hold, and a great many water people of my generation would hold it in great reverence. It was a period in our lives which was different, it was the emergency, as we called it euphemistically. The emergency was there, but the barracks was always the place.
I suppose, I mean, one question I'd love to ask you is Barrack Street as a street is like, it's referred to as the Golden Mile and all the rest. And
yeah,
I mean, because of the barracks, as it stands, I think I'm waffling here now. I don't know what I really want to ask, but no, I forget that question.
No. Barrack Street could be considered the heart of Old Waterford, and if you go back to the GA part of it, in Barrack Street and then its offshoots like Morrison's Road, Monastery Street, that's an area, Mount St Avenue named because of Mount St, all of that Sleeve-Cale Road, that embraced the bulk of the Ernzone and Mount St teams of the early days. Great families, great family tradition, great rivalries, but all a sense of belonging, or very marked sense of belonging. Up the roads, you might have heard that expression. You were either from up the roads or you weren't, and if you weren't from up the roads, you were underprivileged.
Okay.
There was that feeling, a very solid, comfortable sort of a feeling, and real old stock, to use an old expression, which means an awful lot in the people of my time. Real old stock, decent people, and that was it. Barrack Street. Well, Barrack Street would be the heart of it.
Okay. That's grand. I'm just trying to think now if we have any other questions. I think that's fine.
Okay.
That's grand.
That's all right. No, I didn't talk to.
One question I'd love to ask is, you've such a legacy. It's fantastic, and you are a legend.
Thanks very much.
How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, that's an awful question.
I know.
To be remembered by my family, first of all.
Because you were talking about your wife earlier.
Yeah, my family as a man who did his best for them and lived for them, and then on the broader scale, that what I attempted in life was worthwhile, and I'm grateful for what life permitted me to achieve.
Mr. Fanning, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hope I didn't talk too much.
No, great. Cheers.
Thanks, Bob.